symbolism with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where initially the departed sees a great white light, which in most cases, most of the departed cannot grasp. And moving onward, they are confronted with both the beneficial and the wrathful deities. So they may at that time experience great euphoria and joy, but they can also experience great terror in their lives.
And you're going to hear Nerval's uncle actually go over that. I mean, it's shoot, I forgot one of my things here. Oh, here it is. Yeah, he will actually go over the present and why it's so important, and why you know, Neval gets hi Miles too. Just getting started here. So anyway, I'm just going to go for like, you know, 45 minutes or so, and on this, and we'll see how far. And I'll stop after 20, and then maybe just do 15 minutes. So I'll just do like 35 minutes for questions, and you know, just so I don't drone on, you know, which I tend to do. Don't get me started. But anyway, so this book, oh, look at how beautiful it is in Calgary. Tim usually sits by this great big open barn door, and then every once in a while shows us a little bit of the mountains in Helena, which is one of my.
It's beautiful here. Maybe I'll move there so you can.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, yeah, and if you go from I think it's Interstate 90 to Helena, Montana, that road is one of the most beautiful drives. Yeah, look at that sky. It's beautiful. You know, the wonders of Zoom.
That's right. If you go from my house to Miles, the first.
Well, anyway, yes, yeah. I mean, it's not that far. I mean, I just went through there to Banff, and we got lost in Calgary, which is typical for me. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's horrible. But anyway, so we're gonna just I'm just gonna go through this book, and we'll just spend one session on it. Although the more I got into it, I was a little concerned because of the presentation that Stevenson used. You know, he had the introduction, then he had the 1945 lecture, then he had some questions after the 45 lecture, then he had some notes from another session he had, but they were very in raw form. And then he had some notes for it too. And then he has actually the whole book, Aurelia, which, by the way, Aurelia means is the Latin name for chrysalis, which is the golden pupa of a butterfly, and its its emblem is metamorphosis and hiddenness. You know, so this name Aurelia, which was applied to a real live person. Now, this is just a beautiful view that he has. Yes, if you ever go to his website, timholmstudio.com, he has a few videos there of some of this beautiful. What is that building, Tim? It's just such a beautiful building that you're in. It's kind of like a big barn, you know. But anyway, you can tell us later. Do a little tour of your thing. But anyway, so Aurelia is actually has to do with a real woman whose name was Jenny Colin, and she was a singer. You know, that Nerval got involved with the dramatic world, and he's actually just an amazing, creative person. I mean, he's friends with Alexander Dumas and Heinrich Heine, and he actually was in communication with Goethe. He translated Faust into French, and he sent it. This was when he was very young, and he sent the copy to Goethe, and Goethe said that Voltaire had informed him through his whole life, and he can't read Faust in German anymore, but when he read it in French, it had a aliveness and freshness that he didn't remember. Hi, Ivan. I just saying hi, just getting started here. But anyway, the Aurelia was informed young because it was a parallel text to the Red Book. You know, it was a literary production for a psychological purpose. You know, and this is what attracted Jung to it, and he just called it a magnificent creation. You know, that explores irrationality with lucidity and exquisite craft. And if you read it, the things I really like about it is it's so human. You know, I mean, it's very human, even though it's so far away from us. And the other problem is that Nerval is a person who Jung says really was just a potential to exist. He really never had a history, and I think it's involved with his childhood. You know, the fact that his father was a doctor in Napoleon's. He was originally a revolutionary in the French Revolution. And the French Revolution kind of informed what was called Romanticism, which is a rededication to the life principle, you know, and it's was sort of in opposition to the French Revolution because it was dedicated to the irrational, not to the life principle, not to. Hi, Jordy, just getting started here. So anyway, just a quick biography of Gerard. His father went with Napoleon. He was born in 1808. His father married his wife, whose name was Marie Antoinette Marguerite, and Laurent was her last name, and his name was Etienne Labruni, and anyway, they followed Napoleon into Central Europe, and in Silesia, which was a southeastern province of Prussia, which no longer exists, but you know, when Germany was shaped with kind of those two arms, you know, it was a big, and then it had the two arms, which are now part of Poland. Silesia would have been in the lower arm of Prussia, you know, and they were, the Prussians were later expelled from the territory, either, I think, after, both in World War I and World War II. At the end, there was a, you know, they were asked to move to Germany, you know, but so it doesn't really exist anymore. But anyway, she went, when Napoleon was crossing a bridge filled with corpses, she got a fever and died. And then when they were retreating in chaos from Russia, Napoleon, Etienne lost all of his mementos of his wife, all his photos of her, all his letters of her, and everything. So now, and this was in 1810. So Gerard is only 2 years old. So his mother becomes a completely mythical figure. She becomes someone who exists only in his imagination. And this kind of informs his whole creative life too. You know, the fact that whenever he becomes, you know, he has this tendency to be overwhelmed by the unconscious, you know, and he didn't call it an illness. He was a little bit disturbed by his two very modern and compassionate doctors who treated it as an illness. He thought that it was really, he said he was never more fit, than when he was having. But he tended to view Germany and the Rhine and the Black Forest and its crags as the land of the unconscious. This is where his mother dwelled. This is where his mother dwelled. So and his mythical mother. And it kind of reminded me. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie The Elephant Man. But he had a little portrait of his mother. Just that was the only thing he had of his mother, was just this little kind of a round portrait that you would have in a little case that you'd open up, and that was all he had. And it was his heart, his external heart. I mean, it was his soul, and he finally commits suicide by staying up or lying down so that his lungs fill with fluid. And at that point in the movie, anyway, his mother comes alive. I mean, he sees the portrait of his mother kind of forming out of the air, and then he hears this voice that says, "Hey, Stuart." He hears this voice that says, streams flow, winds blow, clouds fleet, hearts beat, nothing will die. And as he hears that part, the photo of his mother comes alive, and starts to speak to him. But this sort of reminded me of this life of Gerard, that he's somehow Germany represents the unconscious for him, because that's where his mother just mysteriously disappeared. And and then he was raised by, at least until he was 6, by his maternal grand uncle. That would have been his mother's uncle. And he was a very free-thinking man who lived in the Valois region of France, which I believe is just northeast of Paris. And he used to go to a place called Clos de Neval, which was where there were some Roman camps, and he would, get the Roman coins and do things. So then when he wanted a nom de plume other than Le Bruni, he chose, and he always had this very strong relationship with his grand uncle, who represented his mother. So that's where he got the name Gerard de Nerval, which is pretty interesting. But anyway, so then, and I want to reiterate to the people who just came on that Aurelia is the name of Jenny Colin, who was this woman who he called an ordinary woman of our century, and that was part of his unforgivable sin, is that he treated this woman who eventually becomes a goddess to him, represent this figure of this woman, Jenny Colin, who was a very ordinary woman of her century. I mean, she marries eventually the tour, someone who organized the tours for this dramatic group that Gerard was involved in with Jenny Colin. And then she proceeds to have all kinds of numbers of children, and she becomes very maternal. She one person criticized her for becoming a little bit she'd put on weight or something, but she just became maternal. And then she dies in 1842. Now, right at that point, and right before she dies, too, this is when this whole book starts. Okay, this is when the book starts, and it is where he's walking along. He tended to walk the streets of Paris at night, every night, and he comes up on a street number which was his age, And suddenly he goes into this this room place that's full of rooms, and he's looking for the room he's supposed to go into, you know, and there seems to be a bunch of professors there giving lectures on memory, on the goddess of memory. And while he's walking, he sees this big figure fluttering in the courtyard, and above the courtyard, a winged figure, and it suddenly crashes down into the courtyard and is inert and is lying there. And it's too big for the courtyard. It's actually spilling over the courtyard. This was his daemon. See, he had the problem. This is what Jung is saying. You know, his problem was the disassociation that he had with the living Jenny Colon and this Aurelia, and the fact that now she's he you know, he says in the he loses her for the second time, when even in the dream world, I mean, this is how this whole thing starts, is the dream is the second life, and he loses her for a second time when she marries the Oriental prince, who's his shadow, you know, and that's what he says. I lost her for the second time. But the introduction that Craig Stevenson did was pretty interesting, because one of the things he just talks about what romanticism is. Okay, you hear of romantic painters who kind of preceded the Impressionists by maybe 2 or 3 decades. And then the Romanticism seems to start about 1790s, you know, or a little later, and move into the 1840s and early 50s. And then after that, it sort of morphs. So, I mean, then you start to get some poets who start to be sort of linked with Wordsworth and with Yeats, and I mean, they start to be writing things about what was going to happen in 1913. So, I mean, you know, which was the break with where you suddenly have all of this explosion of creativity. So you have the Romantic period, then the Impressionists, and then the prelude to Picasso, Brancusi, you know, Gertrude Stein, James Joyce, Thomas Mann, all of that, you know. But anyway, what he was saying about this is what Stevenson says, is that the universe before the Romantic period had 4 strata, and the top strata was heaven, and then it had 2 human realms. One was the realm of the spirit, and the other one was the realm of the flesh, and then it had the realm of hell, which was, you know, associated with evil, but in another time it would have been associated with the underworld, which is not really evil. But he says the Romantics turned, you know, like when Faust goes to with Mephistopheles to Greece to rescue Helen of Troy, Mephistopheles feels very uncomfortable there, because there's no such thing as evil in Greece, you know, and so he feels very uncomfortable. But anyway, the Romantics turned this 4 strata world upside down, that the life principle was in the underworld or in the depths, and this was sort of a prelude to psychology, you know, that it was in the depths, in the psyche, in the soul, where the life principle was. And then the second world, the 2 human worlds, the first one was the world of the daemons, the world where you are in contact with the underworld or life principle. And then it's bifurcated. Heaven is now the realm not of what it used to be. It's now its spirit has become more aligned with what the Romantics thought anyway. And I think it was a necessary part of evolution of consciousness, or the God image. they aligned it more with reason and with spirit that is the transcendent, which is very removed from the human world. And this is what Hillman calls the world of the immanent divine, where this is the transcendent divine. And then the second realm of the human is he, you know, the romantics rebelled from this because they thought that it had an emptiness that did not serve the life principle. So they were, instead of trying to connect with logos, are trying to connect with the life principle, with eros and with the daemons, you know. And so it's you know, a more of a polytheistic realm, which Hillman talks about. You know, I'm surprised Hillman never wrote anything about this. But you know, one thing that this new valuing of the experience of the descent, and to Goethe, which called he called the realm of the mothers, you know, which fed his things and fed his art, and they reject reason. They really relocate the life principle in the depths, the irrational underworld. And he writes this letter to his father, and he says, talking, his father's a doctor. You know, his father wanted him to be a doctor, but he didn't want to be a doctor. And he wrote a letter to his father. Let's hope that Asclepius will rescue us from Hippocrates. So, and what, it's a wonderful little thing. You know, when I first met it, I said, what does that mean? You know, but what it means is Asclepius heals the sick through incubated dreams. You know, in other words, Asclepius's way of healing is through amplifying the dream images that come from the depths, where Hippocrates heals through scientific medicine. So, you know, Gerard is identifying with Asclepius and with healing through incubated dreams. And that was what he was actually talking about, was his treatment at the insane asylums, you know, was he thought were misplaced, because although his doctors were very aware of how you know, incredibly you know, wise he was about healing, and they actually had him work with someone who wouldn't eat. It was this person from the Napoleonic Wars that wouldn't eat, and and he says the tree of knowledge is not the tree of life. So it's so that kind of sets the stage. I mean, Jung liked it because of it was a literary work in service of a psychological purpose, which was parallel to his work with the Black books and the Red Book, you know. So anyway, that's a little bit of an introduction, and I'll just go through Aurelia and Jung's thing real quickly after this. But does anyone have any comments? Nice to see you, Stuart, by the way. I'm sorry I missed the thing yesterday.
That's okay. I normally wouldn't be around Sunday, but just this Sunday I am, so I thought, well, I'll jump in.
Well, yeah.
Sorry for being late.
Yeah, and I think it's not late. I mean, but what I think was, it's just we're not going to spend much time on this book, but it's you can learn a hell of a lot from it. Anybody, does anyone have any comments? And then I'll just.
I do have a short comment, so maybe if when I'm on mic, I'll just put it out there.
Yeah.
From the short description that you've given, and also from what I've read myself of different works, it strikes me that there's two different processes going on simultaneously. There's the journey of thinking to understanding,
Mm-hmm.
to knowing, and there's a journey of feeling to realizing to knowing. Mm-hmm. So it's like two ladders that we climb up to a place of knowing. And one is achieved through thinking and understanding, which means that we have to make it real. So people have experiences real in nature, and then they understand those experiences in order as a way of achieving knowing, which is much deeper. And other people don't manifest those type of experiences, but move more through the less manifested realms of feeling, through more imaginal levels, if you like, into realizing, which is not a cognitive process, it's more an experiential process, and achieve knowing through realizing, which is a more direct route, if you like, whereas thinking is much more physical. Thinking, understanding, I've got to hold it in my hand nearly to see it in order to think about it. So it's made manifest. The symbol is made manifest. But the other process, the symbol is made alive more so than manifest. The symbol comes alive to us more so than manifests for us. And I see this as people writing about their own process, sharing their own experiences via these two routes. But the route is to knowing. The destination is a place where we achieve a sense of knowing within ourselves. And it's just a question of whether we achieve that through understanding or whether we achieve it through realizing, which is inherently a follow on from the point where we leave off, where we begin from. Am I more cognitively based or am I more experientially based? How's my contact within the world?
Are you
so that's the way I see it. I think it's both going
more
to
transcendent or immanent?
Yeah,
Immanence
exactly.
or transcendence. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same, but it's just a process via different means. For some people, it will suit those, do it this way. Other people, like a romantic, will do it that way. And we're actually going to the same place, the destination being the same, but it's just a question of which route. And each route poses different obstacles, if you want to call it that, or challenges that we must overcome on the way. You know, the route of cognition has its obstacles, challenges, and the route of experience has its obstacles and challenges as we go along. So that's my comment.
And I think Hillman would put it in the terms of soul and spirit. You know, that soul, and you'll find this too. One writer described Nerval as from the point of which we're going to start with Aurelia through the end of it, which actually covers about 11 years, you know, although the real critical period happened when Jenny Colon, who was Aurelia, dies, and then his next 11 years in and out of sanatoriums. That's what Aurelia, the time period, I think it's 1842 to 1853, I believe. January 26th, I think, is when he, had committed suicide or whatever. But anyway, this is covering this period. She describes it, a woman who wrote a review, as him in the same period as Christ at Gethsemane, after God had abandoned him, and yet, even though he is living in this world that seems to be absent, represented by the demon Daemon who falls into his courtyard, he has he never loses his incredible sensitivity and his incredible lucidity. In fact, it's never stronger. And there's one person, I think his name's Umberto Eco. I don't know who he is, but he says that his book Sylvie that he wrote during this period was one of the greatest books ever written. I haven't read it, but anyway, so anyone else have any other comments?
Craig?
Yeah, go ahead, Louis.
One interesting thing is not just the fact that Nerval committed suicide, but the method of suicide. He hanged himself to death over a sewer. But to hang himself over a sewer in Paris, he did not use a rope and he did not use a belt, but he used the string of a woman's corset.
Yes. And he had Aurelia, and it was so very, very, very symbolic because it was at a tower, which is there's some big tower. It's a famous tower of a church that was destroyed during the Revolution, and it. Let's see if I can down it here. This is the where the tower is. They tore down the church but left the tower, and this has become a very famous landmark, and it was also, the name of the street was the Street of the Butchers because it used to be a meat packing plant, but it was also where Nicholas Flamel lived. It's called the other street is called the Rue of de Flamel, who was an alchemist who, of all the alchemists in the history of the world, was rumored to be the one who actually produced the Philosopher's Stone. So it's this very interesting area of both the Philosopher's Stone and the and the stone that is rejected and the piles of excrement, and in the top of that excrement there is a golden orb. It comes out of what's rejected in us, and this has to do too with the fact that the ego is not paying attention to the depths or the underworld, and it's got its mind up here when it should be looking within, and where alchemy is not, the purpose is not to be redeemed. The purpose is to redeem the divine that is in the excrement in the body or whatever, and bring it up. And it tells us, he says, do not despise me because I am dark and covered with filth. It's our, and she says it's our attention, our lack of attention that has made her like this. But if we will lend her, what they want is these images, these depths long for the light. They long for the light of ego awareness, consciousness, and that if we will do that, they will give into our hands the morning star, and he writes this and I know this must have appealed to Jung. He says, this is from Neval. Little by little, the dim cavern is suffused with light, and emerging from its shadowy depths, the pale figures who dwell in limbo come into view, solemn and still. And then the tableau takes on shape, and a new clarity illuminates these bizarre apparitions and sets them in motion. Now this is the whole point of alchemy, and is personifying the images that come from the unconscious. I mean, there's this wonderful image of Jung has, where actually Jung is standing and he's pouring water on the depths, and up come the flowers from below, and they bloom out, and it's sitting in each one is a kabiri, and these are the elves or the dwarves of the depths who create meaning. Now if we remember in that that one, it wasn't, it was the first encounter with the soul we did with the man who goes and you know, he finds the dove and the dwarf, who's a hunchback, you know, and they say that the hunchback is the spirit of creativity. You know, it represents the spirit of creativity. And when Jung first met Toni Wolff, and after he had worked with her long enough and was going to discharge her as a patient, he has, and this is in the protocols, which we'll hopefully have. He had a dream that the Kabiri had picked up Toni Wolff and were carrying her inside a mountain, and they were singing while they were doing it. And he knew that if they took her into that mountain, he would never see her again. You know, so that was why he knew he couldn't give up Toni Wolff, because she was someone who the spirits of the creative depths valued very highly. And if he wasn't going to have a relation, keep an open collaboration with her, then the depths were going to take her somewhere else, and then she wouldn't be available to him. But anyway, I thought maybe I'll just go through this, the visions really quickly, and then we can move on. You know, that it's this movie. He after he sees this sign that is his age. You know, then suddenly he sees Aurelia, and she is has hollow face, white, pale face, and she looks at him with his hollow eyes, and he knew that either she would die or he would die. And then he moves in to this room and this place, looking for a room, his room, which he does not know, and he gets lost. And going through, he's looking for a room of his own. And Jung says this is because his existence was only an assumption, not a fact. And the catastrophe is the fall of the daemon into the inner courtyard, and there's no lysis, which he says is very rare. Lysis is some kind of an end to the dream. You know, there's an exposition of the statement of place. There's a development, what the Germans called tying the knot, and then there's the culmination or the peripeteia, which is called the lysis. And this daemon who falls into the courtyard has the fiery quality of Eros, wings with 1,000 colors, unfolding and breaking open and leading to the creation of the philosopher's stone. That was its purpose, his daemon. But since he is now has this disassociation with Jenny Colin and his image of the anima or of his own soul, he's not given the soul anything to do, and so the ego has no task to perform. It can't unfold because he's at a stopping point, and it appears in only the self appears in only what we do, and what we do means what we do with the depths. You know, not what we do in the upper world, but what we need the upper world to be manifest the depth, but it is what we do with the depths. And if we give the depths nothing to do, then it remains invisible, imprisoned inside of itself, robbed of its impetus, can't unfold anymore. And at that point, it turns into the angel of melancholy. And she is a depression. She's a weighing down from the head to the deeper regions. All life pulls back to the deeper regions, to the depths of the body. Now, this is the life with no purpose he's describing. And externally, all that remains are our inhibitions. Nothing happens anymore. Now, this is what he's describing most of his patients, you know, so this is very relevant to us, I think. And the only thing that's left, and he's talking about Nerval, is the exception of suicide. And he says, why? What happened? He says the poet withdrew from reality. You know, he mentions Aurelia is only this ordinary woman of this century, and then you know, but yet he's trapped with no more possibility of development because of this unrequited love of Jenny Colin. You know, she doesn't want anything to do with him. Yet she is his dream girl, and he sort of becomes a little bit of a stalker. He starts writing librettos that only she can perform to try to get her an experience, you know, to get her to come to you know, participate in him. And so now the next day he knew that either he decided one of them were going to die, either him or Jenny. And so the next day he mentally says goodbye to all his friends, launches into these passionate disquisitions of mystical tones. And Jung says it's a launching before the retreat, you know, just like the Battle of the Bulge, you know. Before we retreat into the Fuhrer bunker, we're going to make one more stab at it, you know. And it's the mysteries of the world so anyway, the mysteries of the world and Aurelia are the same thing. I mean, that when he speaks of the mystery of the world, he's speaking about Aurelia. So what he's really talking about is what he should be doing in the outer world. And then he leaves, and one of his friends says he wants to go with him, and he says, I'm not going home. He says, well, where are you going? And he says, I'm going to the Orient. He's going to Germany. He's going to the Rhine. He's going to the Black Forest. He's going to Silesia, where his mother, you know, disappeared. And so, and that's where he always goes when these things happen, you know. And then he sees a star, and he follows the star. He tries to keep the star in view, and he keeps walking. And his friend, they come to a trivia, which is, you know, a three road thing, which is has a really unusual, usually has something to do with Hecate, you know, who is the goddess of dark places. You know, it's at a stopping point where there's no further, you can't go forward. You can only go left or right. You go all the way, then you can only go left or right. You know, so it's this stopping place. And so Hecate was often the goddess of the trivia, and she also is acquainted with, or associated with, the Gorgon, you know. And so she's a symbol, Jung says, of petrification. You know, her glance turns you into stone, imprisonment, and the torpidity of schizophrenia, which is the torpor, you know, the lack of any life energy. So he's lost the life principle. And then he goes on alone, overflows, the dream overflows into life. He takes off all his clothes. He thinks this is the point where he's going to, you know, die. And then he's surrounded by the night patrol, and he's locked up, taken to the barracks, and then he sees he sees his doppelganger his two friends come and release the doppelganger, not him, you know. So this is also, he knew then that he was going to die, because whenever you see your double, that means you're going to die. And then his two friends come later, pick him up. They don't know what he's talking about, you know. And then he proceeds to have some other division. He really goes nuts. And he says he sees this visions of a divinity that always wears many faces, but always stays the same. And she smiles as she casts off the mask of the various incarnations. And then she takes refuge out of its grasp in the mystical skies of Asia. You know, this is such a beautiful book. It really is. I mean, if you read the book, and then he eventually, you know, he just to get this over with quickly, you know, he goes to the land of the dead. He sees his maternal uncle, and this is what I was going to mention based on the earlier conversation. He says he meets this bird who is represented by the circle, the clock, and the soul. It's the soul, and he tells he sees these wonderful visions of molten metal, various hues like blood vessels through the brain, and it's filled with souls who are in a molecular state, you know, and it's lit. He finds himself on an island that is lapped by luminous waves, and it's lit not by the light of the sun. And there's an old man cultivating the soil, and this is the bird man. And he tells him that he's so excited with joy that that he finds out that there's something beyond this world. But this Birdman tells him, you're not ready for this. You've got many things to do, and everything you do on earth affects us here, you know. So he says that we are both humanity, and we are the source of humanity. And if you don't accomplish your task there, you affect us in a bad way, you know. So you know, this is kind of the idea of what is our purpose on earth, you know. And what I think Lewis was talking about that they seem to know a little bit about the future, a lot about the past, but nothing about the present. But that's what they're saying our purpose is, because they feed them, you know, by what we do here feeds them, you know. And so it's sort of, what is going on here? What is the purpose, you know, of all of this? And then the final, it finally leads to, you know, he goes up to, he sees he follows this woman in a taffeta gown, you know, and he comes into this beautiful garden, and he describes the garden. And this is why he is so you know, not a he's so it just tells how he describes all the flowers that he sees, you know. There's the and the pines and the arbors and the spring that runs in and makes this beautiful splashing sound. And then the woman suddenly grows, and she becomes the whole thing, you know. She becomes the woman in the garden, the woman in life, the woman in the world, or the feminine in the world are one, you know. And he's also, this is linked with the fact that he has this horrible separation from the feminine, because his mother was just this mythical figure across the Rhine, you know. And he says, don't disappear. If you disappear, all nature disappears with you. And I think he sort of recognizes that what has got him stuck is his lack of relationship with the real world, that his existence is only an assumption, not a fact. And Jung thinks it's very interesting that the streams in me, the streams of metal are linked with spirit. You know, metal means to search, but he says it's an intellectual and psychological streams. You know, there's the spirit stream, and then there's the psychological stream of the metals. You know, and so it represents sort of the connection between the two. You know, and the other thing is then he's went crazy again after his real friends picked him up, not the shadow, and he goes to they sent him to Montmartre. You know, and I don't know if you know where Montmartre is, but you know it's in a lot of movies. You know, it's this. I mean, if you ever saw Amelie, you know, that's Montmartre, and you know, it's where that church is. I'm sure you guys can remember the name of that church. I'm not really sure what it is, but that
Sacré-Cœur.
is, yeah, the Sacred Heart, the Church of the Sacred Heart, right? And anyway, that is where he's goes, and you know, Emily stands on that hill, and what she thinks about are how many couples are having an orgasm right now. But anyway, and the answer is 15, by the way, and then but it overlooks the Montmartre cemetery where Aurelia is buried, you know, and so this was this really weird coincidence that you know he's being healed at the place where Aurelia is being buried, and you know I don't know if I don't really have a picture, but this is Alexander Dumas' grave, which is art, you know. But anyway, while he's there, he can't find Aurelia's grave, and he knows that the comments that he has her grave on the death certificate. It's on the death certificate, but he goes home, takes all her letters, all his pictures, and just burns them. So you know, and that is the point. You know, eventually where he, you know, just with the manuscript of Aurelia, you know, which is the manuscript, the emblem of metamorphosis and hiddenness, and it's a psychological literary work for a psychological purpose, like the Red Book. He ends his life. But anyway, that's pretty much the story. You guys can comment on it, but after now, I mean, you guys, we just, you know, if anybody wants to talk about anything they're doing or whatever, we can do that too. But I don't you think, I mean, if you went through this and actually studied it, there's a lot to inform us about in that work.
Greg, can you tell us?
Yeah. You wrote that. I just want to mention, is that you, Jan, that wrote the quote from there? The ivy and yellow creepers had sprouted all over the place. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
I'm just wondering where we can find that text.
Oh, Aurelia. Well, it's actually is in the end of the book on what's called on the visionary arts, on psychology and the visionary arts. Or I will also get you a copy of the original. Lewis told me where I could get one for 99 cents. So I will get one and send it out to you. But it's really worth reading.
Craig?
Yes.
The notes at in the second half of the book does extensively quote the text, but it's edited.
Okay, it's not the whole text.
You'll see if you're reading the notations pointing to which sentence is being cited.
Yes, you're correct.
It's all fragmented and just selectively chosen because those were the notes that Dr. Jung was using.
Yes, I will get the actual quotes. I just thought I'd show you too. Here's a picture of Jenny Cole. And this is Aurelia, and she that was when she was younger. The later pictures of her are not very flattering. Later drawings, she just becomes a little more.
Craig, is that actually her, or is
but
that Kuban's interpretation?
I think that is actually her. That is not. See, Alexander Kuban. Now this is actually a good picture here of Gerard de Neval when he was younger. The picture of him when he's older, he looks pretty, but you can see a little more of the sensitivity. That was really Jenny Colin. Alexander Kuban, who wrote another book called The Andrasida, The Other Side, which I've got too, but Young calls him sort of the country James Joyce, which I don't know if Kuban really appreciated that, but I think where Joyce more engages with his Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, Young thought that Kuban just was more of a portal for his very genuine experiences of the unconscious. And I think, I'm not sure, I think Nerval is sort of in the middle, I'm not sure. I would say Nerval is a little more conscious, according to Young.
Yeah. But Kuban also did, at the time, illustrations to be contained within various publications.
Yes, a lot of
Aurelia.
Yes, and his wife, whose name is Hetty, or I forget, she actually did the translation of Aurelia into, I think, either German or English, probably German, But anyway, that is is sort of the story.
So I've got a more practical question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, this is just looking at Raff, because I'm like, I'm wondering if this guy was really doing active imagination. Like his definition, he says the ideal form of active imagination is a dialogue or interchange between an inner figure and the ego. The inner figure actually personifies the content of the unconscious we are attempting to engage, and it does so in a form that can speak and actively exchange information with the ego. So, I mean, he was obviously having all these visions, but I wonder, how much was he a,
he wasn't
an
engaging
active ego?
I don't think he was engaging in mythopoeia, which is a creating of a myth. But go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. So I mean, so really, this kind of sounds more like on the side of psychosis than.
Very close.
Yeah.
He never goes past the trivia. I mean, the word, the three-pronged road.
So, I mean, so he has all these visions, but he doesn't engage with the daemons. He doesn't dialogue. And then he doesn't take, the potential symbols. He doesn't take anything back to his real life. If anything, he just becomes more entrapped and
more crazy.
And what's going
more imprisoned by it.
on.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Go ahead, Stuart.
In relation to what Gary is saying, follow on from that, and also going back to the text, the imagery used in the text is very, very much a perinatal imagery that you'd get in a breathwork session. Somebody experiencing bad womb experiences. So this guy is having a regressive episode, and he's going back to his pre-conscious state, going back to his early years, his womb experience even. So in that way, it is a bit psychotic. But in relation to us working on it, and from a practical point of view, and the active imagination work and all of that, I think it's so important to remember that we are the primal material. We are the earth. The work has to be grounded in us. So, okay, we pick up books and we start studying these texts. The text very easily can become the ground that we need to be. So we get absorbed into somebody else's work and we start doing their work within our process. It's not our work. It's their process that we're studying. And it's so easy as a group shadow, as our own shadow, to lose sight of our own self. If we haven't connected first within our own innermost nature as being here, alive, breathing, living, having a body, feelings, well, then what we're doing is we're entering into this introspected material and we're flying in somebody else's plane. And I think it's so important to refer what we read back to our own reality and work from our own ground, find out where our own ground is and work from that. And to use this material as a reference material in some sense, but not to use it as a guidebook. If you're using it as a guidebook, you've lost touch with yourself. We are the guidebook. Do you know what I mean? You don't get a new television set and then sit down and read the guidebook of the television. You turn the TV on, you look at the TV itself. In some way, by going into the intellectualization of these processes, we're sitting down, we're reading the owner's manual, and the TV is in front of us. We've lost touch with our own ground. The process needs to be embodied within us. The plant needs to grow out of our heart if it's to reach up to heaven. So it's a follow on from what Gary is saying in terms of bringing it back. I think it needs to be brought back, and to recognize the purpose and the work of shadow within ourselves, within a group such as this, where we can lose sight of our own groundedness within this as we start going into all of these really heavy type of texts, which really is describing somebody else's process. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think the value of it to me is its genuineness. Of course, I think the opposite, what you're saying, Stuart, is the problem, and what Gary was saying too, is that he doesn't ever go anywhere, and yet he experiences it, like Baudelaire said, with tremendous lucidity. And by the way, Jan, I was looking for that his description of the garden that you have in the text. I couldn't find it, but it's just beautiful. You know, his knowledge of what flowers and trees were in his vision. And he says that there's no, as we all know, there's no sun in dreams. You know, that the beings are all radiant and luminous themselves. You know, so in our dreams, what Joseph Campbell said, you don't need to say, turn on the light, I want to see my dreams. Images are radiant and luminous of themselves. And so when he's describing that garden that the woman in the taffeted dress, you know, merges with, it's just so beautiful. I read it to my wife this morning, you know, and I was going to try to read it here, but I see Jan put it in the chat, you know, but anyway, it's just a wonderful, even though I agree with everything Stuart said and with what Gary said, he never goes anywhere. I mean, he's sort of and Jung says, what was that deal now in Encounter? Wasn't the guy's name, was it Charles? Yeah, not our Charles here, but there was, who was that one that did the active imagination? I forget what his name was. But anyway, his problem too was that the anima and the shadow, oh no, that was Anna Marjula. The anima and or the animus and the shadow ganged up against her, you know, and that's what Jung says is happening here. The Prince of the Orient marries Aurelia, and that's when he's going to go kill her, and then kill him, and then suddenly he stops, and the dream ends because he hears a scream, and the scream is Aurelia's scream, and so the whole idea is, since he is living, his existence is an assumption, not a fact, and the anima and the shadow are ganged up against him. If you don't integrate the shadow or you don't integrate the anima, they get married in the unconscious, and then they become demonic, you know, and poisonous. And, you know, that's why you'll see the images of, you know, who was, I think, I don't know, sure if it was Isis that poisons her own son or something, you know. It's just this image that if the anima is not, she's the principle of life. And that's what Jung says at the end in the question and
Okay.
answer things. What could have shattered these shells was the principle of life. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Dr. Jung makes two very fine points. The first is that there's a world of difference between falling into schizophrenia and diving into schizophrenia. He also points out that if you're practicing, for example, active imagination, and you encounter all these magnificent personages and have great conversations with them, or if you're simply meditating and you have these great revelatory insights, they don't mean anything unless you can translate them into three-dimensional time and space. For example, Dr. Jung's sculptures and artwork, some people may be authors, because this coincides with the teachings of the Buddhists, who state that karma is the result of action. And by action, they mean actions while living in the here and now. If you just sit at home and want to meditate for hours upon hours, but you don't do anything with it to enlighten your life in the outside world or others in the outside world, it remains somewhat of a skeleton. And this is where Neval failed, because unlike Dr. Jung, who approached the latent psychosis, he had a family, he had a job, he had a place where he knew that he lived, and he had his paintings, and it was this concrete reality that saved him. Neval didn't have anything like that, because
He says he was two-dimensional. Jung actually says he's a two-dimensional being.
Yes, he's two-dimensional, and that's why I believe he fell into schizophrenia and ultimately committed suicide.
Yeah, and he also is, what is it he says? That what could have cured him was life, the principle of life. It would have shattered the shells that disconnected him from, you know, that had imprisoned him. It would shattered the shells. Why don't we hear from everybody? Why don't we just start with, why don't we start at the bottom? I mean, Jan's been giving a lot of commentary, but why don't we just start? We'll go with you, Charles, and then we can just go around and everybody has something to say about it. You have anything, Charles?
Yeah, I didn't read all of it because stuff like this can be a little bit difficult for me to read because
yes, I bet.
I mean, I about a year ago had a kind of scare with like almost psychotic kind of episode and thought I was possibly going to go into psychosis. So a really difficult time. So reading stuff like this can be a little bit difficult for me. But
it is a little scary.
Yeah,
I mean, did anybody else get that thing? It was a little scary. The whole book was. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just yeah, I can't really say a whole lot because yeah, I didn't read all of it, but I think the idea of that life itself and like living life was kind of somewhat of an antidote to this problem. I find really interesting because it's the idea of kind of having to stay grounded and actually needing to live on the earth and not just kind of float away as I would put it. So it was difficult text to read, but I could relate to it quite a bit.
Well, it kind of reminds me of your dream where the gates of heaven open, and then how do I live? Go to the corner tavern knowing that I'm the son of God, at the same time. I mean, that you're both me, Craig, and also you have the divine within you. And the idea is to keep them separate, I mean, to like uh, Lewis said, I live on 228 Seastrasse. I have a wife and 5 children. I'm a doctor, and I mean, there needs to be this grounding and these feet on the earth things, and so life shatters the shells. I think that when he said that, he was referring exactly what Lewis says. Well, I was going to ask Miles since he changed to the number last again, but I guess Ivan, what do you think?
I guess I'm kind of wondering, what I still don't fully understand is Jung's interest in this and why this was, what the ultimate lesson is from it, I suppose.
For Jung?
Yeah.
Well, Jung thought it was a parallel text to the Red Book, I mean, that it actually, it was a literary work written for a psychological purpose. And see, Jung experienced, that was when he knew that life would shatter the shells of the imprisonment in the visions that were overpowering at that time. Life shattered the shells. So that was why he was so interested in this. And there is actually some absolute knowledge in it. I mean, there's some things in there that you are, where he speaks, where the uncle tells him that what happens on earth informs them, or their lives are not completely happy and carefree because they have struggles as well, and the earth, what happens on the earth is something that feeds them as well. Okay. How about you, Stuart? We've got about 15 minutes left here.
Yeah, there's I think okay, where I'd be coming in on this would be this and more, if you like, would be to talk about the process itself, the process as we involve ourselves with it, and also what the process needs from us in order for it to be a wholesome process for us. So it's not so much a study of the text material where I'd be coming from. It's more a study of ourselves as we study the text material. So it's a shifting in the perspective of where we work from and where we're working to. These text materials are tremendous guides. They're given to us as guides. They're different people's words, descriptions of what they experienced and what they realized. So they're incredibly valuable, but they're only valuable if we can observe the effect it has within our lives, within ourselves, within our own psychological position. So we need to constantly be aware of our relationship with them, and what the outcome, what the intended outcome of that relationship is. So in other words, for the text material, which is very rich in symbolism, and it's very seductive in a sense, because it's what I'm interested in. For me to enter into this type of material, which pulls on me because I'm so interested in it, for me to enter into a relationship with this, I've got to be very clear in myself about what it is that I'm looking for, so that I don't let it become me. It becomes full. So I think that's one observation I would hold on it, and I think that's a very important observation, because it realigns the nature of who I am and what it is and who's working for who, it reorganizes the field, if you like. It brings order to the field. It brings self-awareness back into the equation, whereas the other one is to go unconscious, enter into the shadow and go unconscious within it. The other observation I'd have in relation to this is that anima needs to be given sight. That sort of process of self-awareness happening within us, self-realization happening within us, we bring sight to the inner worlds. The present tense, the now experience comes from us living consciously. So in the absence of that developing relationship with our own anima, and in the absence of us bringing self-awareness into our own lives, which is the qualities of the anima to us as well, self coming through anima to us, without that correct organization of positions and relatedness, it's so easy to avoid that conscious relationship with anima, and then the anima possesses us more so as a vindictiveness in us against ourselves. So can throw us back into these regressive times, perinatal states, where we experience these sort of demonic visions or these archetypal images more from the dark mother, and it becomes terribly psychotic, confusing, early, very primordial, and really I think all of that can be avoided by really being very clear on our own approach. Where am I coming from before I even pick up this text? Where am I coming from and what do I want from it? So it's like doing the work in order to do the work. That's so I'd say my observations or my input has been very, very practical. Yeah. And in the sense then after having that sort of insight, do I even need to pick up the book and study it at all? Is my own material nothing?
Well, yeah, the only thing, and Jan, maybe you can at least comment in the chat on this, is what I got out of it, even though, like Gary said, and Lewis said, and you said, Stuart, as well, nothing ever happens. He never gets past the three-pronged road, and Hecate, and so he's now imprisoned in the world of darkness, in the world of petrification, imprisonment, and torpidity. At least there's some images like this one. I mean, everything in here is so authentic. So if we are doing it on a wholesome basis, like, hopefully we're going to learn more about with when we learn more about the soul, this little comment that I think really got young. Little by little, the dim cavern is suffused with light, and emerging from its shadowy depths, the pale figures who dwell in limbo come into view, solemn and still, and the tableau takes on shape. Now, this is giving ego attention to the images. Did you have, how about Miles? I skipped you twice because you keep moving in our rotation here. Sorry.
Hi, everybody. Well,
Yeah.
What was going through my mind, some of the things that Stuart mentioned about different paths, and you need to have both knowledge and then have experience. And then you mentioning, Craig, the shadow and the anima sometimes teaming up to create perceived havoc in a person, in a male's mind. And I shared about how even in elementary school, being captivated by the mysterious girls that captured my heart in one way or another. And that was just in elementary school. Where I live here in Canada, in Calgary, we have elementary school, then we have junior high, then we have high school. And it made me think about, how fortunate I was to have good parents and a mother of light, not a dark mother. So even though I was being, the energy of the anima trying to get through to me, I nevertheless got through that without a lot of injury. But all this talk makes me think about the sad state of, and I'll speak for myself, but I grew up in the 60s and 70s with my education, and the schools here at that time, the public schools, they're very much just boxes that you went to, and when I shared previously about this, when I lived in Edmonton, I had the joy of traversing through a ravine and crossing a little creek to get to my school. But my school was just a big box. And then the school that I went to here in Calgary, I should take some pictures of it. This was built in about 1970, this school. And the architects must have thought there was something captivating about a shoebox, because literally this school is just a big shoebox with a few little slits for windows here and there in the corners. And I guess the thought was back then that you don't want windows in schools because the kids will be distracted by what they see outside. So anyway, let me just bring it to a conclusion. So it's been a sad state of affairs for education insofar as none of this talk of the soul and what is going on is part of my educational experience. And for some people, that if they don't have a strong family or a loving mother, that it could really send them over the edge. Maybe, and this explains perhaps why there's a lot of male violence. We're not attending to the soul needs of youth. So I think I'll just end it there. Thank you.
Yeah, and Tim speaks of the utilitarianness of modern day architecture. Tim, what do you have some observations on this, or anything at all? It doesn't have to be about this.
Well, I have yet to read the text. I'm fascinated with the conversation, and the stuff that's going on in the chat is really exciting to me. I've been doodling all this time, and here's one.
I got to get speaker view, and you can see it better. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's beautiful.
But it seems to me that boy, I'm thinking of all kinds of things. One of the things that jumps out of me from what Jan said in the chat is the idea of an idea becoming calcified in art. And art does have that danger where as soon as you create an image, it eliminates the other possibilities. And this is a central artist struggle that is, as soon as you have a blank piece of paper or a canvas, you put the first mark on and you're kind of committed. The openness has disappeared. I've been impressed by Picasso. There's a wonderful film of him working on a painting, and it's on a big sheet of glass, and the camera is underneath the glass. So you're watching as his strokes appear. And
yes, I've seen
his painting over and over and over again. And to me, I find that process very, very difficult because it's hard for me to alter the mark that I put on the paper or the canvas. And I think our minds work the same way. We kind of grasp an idea, and because there's a little bit of solidity to it, we become committed to that idea, and we keep adding on to it. And pretty soon it becomes so ponderous, you can't just take it down. You feel like building a building. Oh, I want to shore up what I've got rather than destroying it and starting over. And I need to think more about that idea that we as we try to express what's going on, there's both this wonderful luminosity that the expression takes on, but there's also the danger that it calcifies and we can't move on beyond that.
Yeah, I would think one of the things that would be really is where Jung's value, like Ivan was asking, to this work was that it was a work of art for a psychological purpose. And this is how it was parallel with the Red Book, you know, and so, you know, and Lewis mentioned earlier in the chat about where the voice told him that, you know, he was doing art, you know, and I kept trying to remember who said that. And it was Maria Moltzer, you know, said that you know, she was she's actually was Jung described her one time as a brilliant psychopath, and he had a real trouble getting expunging her thinking from his himself. I mean, he was sort of a little bit imprisoned by her, but I would think that would be something that any artist would be interested in, the psychological purpose of art, where she's telling him this is only art. Do you have something, Stuart?
Yeah, just in relation to what Tim said there, I think that's really, really insightful about when you describe putting your pen on the page and the openness is gone, you're committed. And I think as we put our pen on the page of our life, as we step in meaningfully into our life and create the art that our life is, we need to commit ourselves into that process. You know, it's a blood and guts process. And in doing that, the inner world takes notice of us. We make ourselves real as it sees us, as it responds to us. So you know, the relationship with the anima, through the anima with the self, that is a living conscious relationship. And the consciousness within it, the awareness within it, is the quality flowing both ways. So not to become calcified within our own life. It's part of our own living process of involvement with our process that avoids that calcification from happening, that stuckness from taking place, where we get locked out of our own life and we die in the desert. We die of thirst in the desert, in a sense. So by seeing that as our purpose, not get lost not get fooled by the dragon's treasure, not to be seduced off our path, but to stay true to our own path, a living path of aliveness, where we bring life to the inner world by giving it eyes so that it sees us. And then
Stuart,
it brings meaning into our life. That's my response. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead,
Stuart,
Miles.
I
Yeah.
just want to ask, and Lewis as well, or Craig, I've been talking about education and being so important, early education that would include the processes that we're referring to and the concepts of Jung. And here in Alberta, we're now seeing a rise of people wanting charter schools. So instead of just the public school system, or we have also the Roman Catholic school system, there's now people saying, well, we want our own kind of schools as well, charter schools. So just wondering if anybody knows of anyone anywhere who has started a charter school that would be founded upon Jungian concepts.
Ooh, a Jungian concepts. Well, yeah, Jung, as Charles has mentioned, you know, Jung's work is, I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting thing. I would say, you know, what Jung told his wife you know, they ask him, why are you interested in, how come you're not interested in child psychology? And he said, because they don't have any symbolic material. And, you know, and then Emma Young says, well, she says, Carl, you're not interested in anybody who doesn't have symbolic material. But on Jungian principles, on the soul of being related to Eros, I mean, to being related to the, well, you know, there's a college called St. John's, which I was going to go to back in the 70s, which is totally interested in the liberal arts and the humanities. And, you know, it's truly a hermetic vessel. And they're not teaching thinking, they're teaching thinking with the heart, thinking with art, using art for a psychological purpose rather than some other purpose. But I think that's what you're talking about, Miles. That is, I think they could do that in a private school. Go ahead, Louis.
I'm familiar with a number of charter schools, and also know a number of people who believe and engage in home teaching. I don't know of any charter school where depth psychology forms the basis of their teaching, and I applaud that. I'm glad there isn't such a school, because I suspect it would not take long before Dr. Jung's work became just sheer dogmatism. Even Dr. Jung recommended a third of his clients to Adler and a third of his patients to Freud. On the other hand, I hardly endorse people going to Amazon or to their local library and buying one of Dr. Jung's books and reading it from cover to cover. It also presupposes, for example, in home teaching or homeschooling, and most of what I know from homeschooling is in Utah, Montana, Idaho, where many of the homeschoolers have a belief and a conviction in plural marriage. And they would like to teach their own principles, including that of the law of consecration, to their children at home. And I'm not opposed to that in general, but I know that if I had a young 7th grader here and I was told to home teach that child in the end would fail algebra, because I don't know algebra. And I can't, you know, I think maybe I can name 10 symbols of the elements in chemistry, but it doesn't do much good to say, well, I'm home teaching and homeschooling, although that has a nice air to it. You know, if you're not competent to teach, you're not competent to teach. And as far as a charter school teaching document, a lot would depend on who are the administrators and what do the teachers know. Lord knows there's no shortage of wretched books written by persons claiming to be so-called Jungians, but that doesn't necessarily make them good scholars or sound representatives of Dr. Jung's work. So I believe with Dr. Jung, the day will come when his words will be widely read, but the causation of that will be sheer necessity on the part of huge masses of humankind. But I don't see it happening anytime soon. In the United States, there'll be conservatives who object to it for their reasons, part of which are legitimate, but also will be frowned upon by liberals. And again, you know, with some merit, but I personally don't see that happening. I can see groups like this sprouting up, and people diligently reading each week a portion of Dr. Jung's work. And I think that would be a benefit in and of itself.
Yeah, you know, the Khan Academy, if you guys ever want to learn about anything, I don't care what it is, go to the Khan Academy, KHAN, and they will have a little 10-minute video on it. And they are also working with schools. But I think one thing that Miles said, can you imagine, like, for instance, if you could combine some of the things from Native American teachings with just as the spirit of it, you know, just as the humanness of it, you know, in you know, we're getting into just math and chemistry and geometry, and we're losing the liberal arts, which a lot of people are grieving about. But how about you, Gary? You can have the last word. And next week we'll just read the first chapter of anatomy of the soul, and every other week we'll just read one chapter, and in between we'll spice it up with anything you want. If you want pueri turnus or transcendent function, we'll just you know, but we'll try to get through. The reason we want to get through that book is because of the importance of distinguishing between spirit and soul, which is not clear to me.
What was the title of that book? I missed it.
It's called Anima, the Anatomy of a Personified Notion. So
And the author is?
James Hillman.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll send out a link to it. Go ahead, Stuart.
Greg, this is just an observation. I think it's wonderful what's happening here, the amount of material that's been brought up and that we're using. Also, I'm sort of throwing in, look at the speed we're going at. Wow, we're covering these massive works in the space of a meeting, 2 meetings, whatever, flying through it. And it's like, let's not lose sight of the shadow of the group. Let's not lose sight of our own shadow, which is in the speed, which is in covering this massive knowledge so quickly. How is it possible to cover this stuff in depth if we're going through it so quickly? And yet claim, you know, after doing it, we all claim some knowledge of it.
Yeah, I hate that too much too. The only reason I did this one so quick is because of, like what Charles said, I think it's a little scary.
Well, Craig, what I'm naming here is
Just a little. Yeah,
Craig,
I didn't want to spend more than 1 or 2 episodes on it. Go ahead.
Craig, what I'm naming in this is that there is a group collusion, and the collusion is that we don't keep our ground. The ground is to take one of these books and really go into it in depth within ourselves. But to lose ground is to skim them and to take what suits. And in a way, we lose the essence of what the work is about, which is to bring us home to ourselves. So not to collude in a disconnect and to become just all knowledge about this, but to see the shadow, embrace the shadow within it, and to say, okay, guys, you know, let's really go in depth into some of this stuff rather than skimming it. So
yeah, and
there's a word of praise and a word of warning side by side in that. And you know, I claim realness in speaking it out. I'm just speaking out what's real. Let's name the shadow, if you like, within the process of skimming through.
Exactly. You're very good at that, Stuart. You have shown me that. I mean, you have a ability to spot it. But we'll only do like 1 chapter of Hillman, and I think those are just an essay. And then we'll go on to, I think I would like to do pueri turnus, at least on Kingdom Without Space, you know, because of we have some puers and puellas in the group, and I think it'd be very important. But yes, I do not like, and if you notice, I don't skim through this. I just bombard it, you know, I really do. I've been in groups where I don't think people read it once, you know, but go ahead.
Craig, I'd just like to make a little public service announcement.
Yes.
On Sunday, August the 8th, beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, our friend Skip Conover is going to be running a seminar. And he's going to have, his guest is going to be Murray Stein.
Oh, great.
So I'm mentioning this because Skip is aware that you have your presentation on Sundays.
Yes.
And he tried to get it later, but it'd be at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We'll be done before that today,
Yeah.
but just make sure that we don't have two seminars running at the same time.
Exactly.
I know myself and some of the others here would like to send both.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and if you ever go to the Asheville, North Carolina, I think you've been on that, Louis, haven't you? They have
Not.
Murray Stein does some fabulous work there. I did not know that Murray was so good. Gary, you've got the last word. What do you got to say?
Yeah, well, so, in this stuff, I'm really interested in the applied aspect of it. And, and I really agree with what Stuart says as far as, we don't want to start doing, other people's work. We want to come away, focused on our own. And I know, like for some of the active imaginations that I've done, sometimes I come back from them and, although I can paint them and stuff, I have to wonder, like, I have no idea what really any of this is. But one of the things that occurred to me, and, I'd actually like to hear your viewpoint on this, is that and I put a quote up on divination and synchronicity from Marie-Louise von France in the chat. But, when you throw the I Ching, a big part of it is kind of having this very important question in your mind that, that you've put a lot of focus into. And, and it strikes me that perhaps one of the things to do in active imagination is something similar, because, the problem we have with the unconscious is that it's infinite in depth and content. But if we could kind of signal it, like, hey, this is what I'd like to work on, maybe we get something that gives us a better chance at understanding what we get back. And of course, the danger in that is that depending on, what our complexes and stuff are, maybe we're not even asking the right questions. But yeah, what's your comment?
Oh, well, I would say, the I Ching, of course, as far as when I throw it, I always ask the same question. Just, I don't even want to say it. It's just, help me, God. That's my question every time. But, the idea is it just gives me the Tao of the moment. And it tells me exactly what the Tao of the moment is. Now, I usually try to do one before I do an active imagination, just because I kind of, like, it sort of gives a little bit of a boost to it, because it's real. I mean, if you guys have ever done anything with it, it's very, very real. But I say, like in my own case, since I'm so dense and my ego is so harsh, such a harsh light. And, I know Stuart has encountered this too. My harsh light of my ego is a little stifling, but I have to do it's through repetition. That is the only way I can do it. By the way, I forgot about Kevin being here. Kevin, you've got the last word. So I know you came in late, but you have any words of wisdom on anything for us? Doesn't have to be about what we talked about.
I don't know. I don't really have much to say. Like I was just 10 minutes left to restart it. I end up sleeping because it's a bit late here. But I don't really have a word of wisdom today. Yeah, I think dream analysis is important if you're gonna go depth into something. And that's it.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, great. Okay. Well, next time we'll just read, and I think you guys will love Hillman, because this is the early Hillman is very it's very close to Jung, and it's close to Jung's coreness, I mean, and the later Hillman, I would not say that is true, but this early Hillman is and I learned so much from it, and it is about what is the difference between soul and spirit, and where Jung is more essa in anima, being in soul. So that's and I will send links out to all the books, and Did I miss anybody or anything? I think everybody's okay.
Craig, I don't think I'm on your email list.
Okay, yes, Louis, I was looking for your email. Could you send it to
I'll
me
send
again?
it.
Maybe it's in, if I look back, I could find it, but I was trying to get you on it.
I'll send it to you on Facebook Messenger.
Perfect. Yeah, okay. All right, well, anyway, we'll start with that next time, and I don't think anybody did be disappointed. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Nice to see you, Stuart.